Hi, and welcome to Lunch with Lisa. And today I'm going to show you how I make sourdough bread. It's Lunch with Lisa. Hi, I'm Lisa, and I make quick and easy healthy meals. And I'm a work in progress. I'm not perfect. I'm in the gym, I'm working out, and I like to play around with all sorts of foods. I'm what you call a flexitarian. No, that's not like flexing for the gym. It's like flexible dieting. I mostly stick to a plant-based diet, but I also like to eat meat. So I definitely have not crossed off any foods from my diet at all, just so you know. But I just wanted to put that out there so you know where I stand. I love food and I will eat all of it. So I bring to you sourdough bread. This is actually like the best loaf I've made to date, and it is so beautiful. Look at that. It's got a little floral pattern. I'll show you exactly how I make this, so keep watching. So here are my 10 steps to bake sourdough. But first, let me explain that I'm not an expert. I don't know everything about this subject. But I did learn all that I know from Brian Lagerstrom and the Bread Code, and I will link their YouTube channels down below. And there are many ways to bake sourdough bread. This is just what's worked for me, and I'm happy to share it with you. For this recipe, you're going to need whole wheat and bread flour, water, a sourdough starter, and if you don't want to make your own starter, you can find them on the website for Cultures for Health. Link is down below. And salt. So let's get into step 1, preparing the starter. What I do is I have my starter in the fridge, and so I take it out a couple days before, and I take out most of the starter and put it into my discard jar. And this discard is what I use to make all the other recipes that I'm going to share with you next week. And I just leave a little bit in my jar for making my starter for the sourdough. As you can see, there's just a little bit left in there, maybe about 25 grams, maybe a little more. And then I put the discard away back into the fridge. And then I put my starter on the scale and I zero it out, and I add maybe about 90 grams of water. You're supposed to put equal amounts of water and flour together, but I like to put a little less water with my starter because it just makes it a little more yeasty. And then I stir it all together to make sure that starter is just dissolved into the water. And then I clean up the inside of my jar with my spatula. So what is starter? It's basically just flour and water left to ferment on your countertop, and then the yeast grow and it creates the rising action in your bread. Just like if you bought conventional yeast at the store, but this is just flour and water. And then I get out my flour. I like to do about a quarter of whole wheat, so about 25 grams. And then when I'm making bread, I add in my bread flour up to 100 grams, so about 75 grams of the bread flour. And then I stir it all together until there are no dry bits. You have to get it all incorporated. So it takes a couple minutes just stirring it all together because it gets kind of chunky. And that's what you want. You want it nice and thick. So I like to go around and clean off the inside of my jar so I can see how much it's rising. So I spend a little time doing that. And mind you, this is a couple days before I'm going to bake my bread, just to get my starter all nice and warmed up. And then I will do this 2 more times to really wake my starter up from being in the cold fridge for who knows how long. Maybe a month, maybe a couple weeks. I don't know. Depends on when I'm making sourdough bread. And the flour is all incorporated into the water. And then I just put a lid loosely on top of it. I don't want to screw anything down. Then I like to mark where my starter is at so I can tell how much it's grown. You can either use an expo marker or a rubber band. And I'm just going to leave this in a warm spot on my countertop. It's 5:30 in the morning. And by 10 a.m., that's 5 hours later, it's tripled in size. So once my starter is tripled in size like this, I can then start on to the next step. Step number 2, Autolyse. We're going to mix the flour together with the water and let it sit for a little while. So I'm going to take about 100 grams of whole wheat flour, because I love whole wheat sourdough. Then we're going to add in 400 grams of bread flour. Bread flour is just higher in protein content than regular flour, so it gives you a better chance of developing all the gluten. And then I'm going to mix those together with a whisk, make sure they're nice and incorporated. Then I'm going to zero out my scale and add in about 315 to 325 grams of water. Then I'm just going to mix that all together until it all comes together. It will seem dry, but just keep squeezing the dough. I just give a lot of squeezing action going on here. No kneading involved, just squeezing the dough to get it all worked together. You don't want to add any more water here. Just keep going, see how it's coming together. It'll come together. It won't feel like it will, but it will. And then it'll be really shaggy. See how shaggy it is? It has no gluten development right now. It just kind of tears when you pull at it. So let this sit for 1 hour covered. And as you can see, it's been sitting for about an hour, and look how much gluten has developed. We're doing the window pane test here. I'm seeing how thin I can get it. And that's perfect. So on to step 3, mixing in the starter. So I'm going to put my bowl back on the scale and zero it out. And I'm going to add my starter. Look at this beautiful starter. Oh, it's got all these nice little air pockets inside of it. How cool is that? So we're just going to pour about 100 grams right on top of our dough. And then you're just going to spread this out over your dough and just mix it in as well as you can. I just like to spread it out. And then I'll take the edges of the dough and just start folding it. And the more you fold it, the more it's just going to get mixed in. That way it's not so sticky on your hands. And then I just mix it kind of like I did with the water. Just do a lot of squeezes and folds. Just trying to mix it all together. Eventually it will absorb. Feels like it won't at first, but you just got to keep going. All right, it's all mixed in as much as I can, and it's all over my hands. Now let that rest for 15 minutes covered, and then we're going to come back. And step number 4, we're going to mix in the salt. I'm just going to put it on the scale and weigh out about 10 to 12 grams of salt. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more water, maybe about 15 grams, because that salt is going to want to have some water with it. Just helps to incorporate it a little bit easier. So I just kind of poke at it and then start folding and squeezing, getting all that worked in together. So we have a nice dough forming here. And without salt, it's just going to be so bland and tasteless. You need the salt. Don't forget the salt. Now, do you have to do it all like this? Absolutely not. This is just what I like to do. Some people put all of it together all at once. You're going to let that sit for 30 minutes. So set a timer. You will forget. And then we're going to go to step number 5, stretch and fold. This is a fun part. So you're going to get your hand wet, shake off as much water as you can, and then you're going to grab one edge, pull it as high as you can go without tearing it, and then fold it over. Then you're going to go around and do this about 3 or 4 more times. Just stretching and folding. Stretching and folding. This is going to create gluten layers without having to knead it. And then I like to kind of wrap it around and just kind of fold it onto itself a little bit to stretch out that top layer and get it all nice into a neat little ball. And I'm just going to let that sit covered for another 30 minutes. Set a timer. And then when we come back, we're going to do another set of stretch and folds. Remember that wet hand? So you're going to pull it up and stretch and fold. And then tuck it away. If you notice any air pockets on top, there's a big one right there in the center. Give it a good pop. And then any other ones you might find, just go ahead and pop those. And then cover it up. And you're going to let this sit for 2 hours. This will be your long fermentation. And then step number 6, we're going to shape our dough. To get our nice sourdough loaf, we're going to have to shape our dough, which means giving it some kind of structure. So I'm going to lightly flour my surface and scrape my dough out onto the flour. I don't want it sticking to the table. I'm just using a dough scraper here to get it out of my bowl. And then you just want to pat it down, squish out as much air as you can, kind of deflating our fermentation. Then I'm just going to lift it up and give it a little stretch, kind of give it into a semi-rectangle here. See, I'm squishing all the air pockets out. And then I'm going to start at the bottom and just give it one little fold up. And then fold in my sides, kind of like a letter. And then I'm going to start at the top and start rolling it down and squeezing. And that's going to give this nice, like, tight skin that will want to burst open when we cook it. Just gives it a beautiful sourdough look. Then I'm going to fold it in half to give it even more stretch. And I have my banneton here. I'm going to flour it. If you have one that's brand new, flour it really good. You don't want it to stick. Mine's been used a couple times. I'm going to stick my dough in there, and then I want to seal up this bottom part. Squish it all together. Seal up the ends. And you don't have to do it in any fancy way. Just squish it together. And then flour that real good so it doesn't stick to anything. And I like to use this shower cap, or you could just use some plastic wrap. And wrap this guy up. We're going to do a cold retard, and that just means putting it in your fridge overnight. Step number 7 is you're going to preheat your oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit with your Dutch oven inside. I leave the lid off. Step number 8, scoring the loaf. When the oven reaches temperature, you're going to pull out your sourdough loaf from the fridge. We're going to sprinkle semolina flour, or you can do cornmeal on top just so it doesn't stick. Now you can use this silicone baking mat for Dutch oven bread baking. It has reusable long handles. I'll link it down below. Or you can just use parchment paper. And you're going to place it on top of the bread and flip the bread out. And it's supposed to pull out nice and beautifully if it doesn't stick. Then I'm going to dust off as much of the flour as I can. And here's my lame. This is my scoring tool. I need to score my loaf so that it expands in a controlled way. Otherwise, it'll just go all over the place and it'll end up looking funky or maybe be too dense. I don't know what it does. I've never not scored it. Maybe I should try that one day. But here I'm just putting a little leaf pattern in. And then I'm going to score starting at the very top at a 45-degree angle or more. I'm going to drag it across all the way down to the bottom. And then I'm going to go back and give it another little bit of score so it has a nice ear. And then I'm going to score the other side so that kind of sticks out too. And you'll notice that there's like this skin on it. And the inside should be bubbly. Step 9, we're going to bake this thing. So pull out your hot Dutch oven. And I'm just going to stick my bread inside, and I like to sprinkle in some water to create some more steam, or you can use a spray bottle. Put the lid on and stick it in your hot oven. Lower the temperature down to 485 degrees and leave it in for 18 minutes. After 18 minutes, you're going to lower the temperature to 465 degrees, and you're going to remove the lid, and you're going to enjoy your big puffy loaf. Now we're going to put the timer on to 25 minutes, and we're going to bake it the rest of the way. As you can see, it gets nice and dark. Look at that beautiful loaf. And step number 10, you're going to let it cool and slice that baby up. All right, so my sourdough loaf has totally cooled off. It's been sitting out all morning, and it's ready to be cut open and to take a peek inside. Ooh, let's see how good I did with this one, because this one turned out so lovely. Like, I've never had an ear that big before, and I've never had it open up so much. And I really think the key is slicing it further down here and here, because I would start my slices a little bit higher, so I went lower this time, and I feel like it opened up a lot more. Yes, okay. So that's one thing I learned. And I got this cool cutting board on Amazon. You can find the link below. It's got a little tray insert inside, and inside are these little guides for cutting. This tray is a crumb catcher, so it goes right back. When you pull it out, you stick it right back in, and it catches all the crumbs. Well, not all the crumbs. See, and it fits right there. So easy. And these guides are for cutting thin slices and thick slices. So there's two different sets of slices you could cut. And then this just keeps the guides together, straight up and down. And you can make this as big or as wide as you want. Like, If you had a smaller loaf, you could do that. And if you had a really tiny loaf, you could do that. The only problem is it's not the best thing for sourdough loaves if you want to just cut it like this because it doesn't fit. No. So this is what I do with my sourdough loaves. The first thing I do is I just cut it in half. It's dramatic and I like to see what's inside. I don't need a guide just to cut it straight down. Oh, look at that. That's my best loaf yet, y'all. Yes. It's squishy. Okay, so after I cut it in half, put one half to the side, and then I place this half straight down, like that. Then I can stick these guides in here. To cut it. Okay, just like that. And then I usually hold it. I like nice thick slices, so I'm gonna do the thick slice side. And it makes these perfect slices of bread. I love it, especially if you have a nice sharp bread knife like this Cutco one. It's a little bit easier for me to hold. And voila! Like, it's still not perfect. It's rustic. All right, so then I have somewhat even pieces. I've been doing this. This is like, I've been cutting my bread with this, and it's never perfect. But it's better than doing it by hand. Let's see if I can do it without the guides. Crumbs are still everywhere. This is what I normally do. It gets really hard towards the end. I think I had about the same success rate. This thing is really great if you make sandwich loaves because they're more uniform because you bake them in a tin. So that's pretty much why I got this, because I did make a sandwich loaf. And then the sandwich loaf ended up being too big. So check this out on my Amazon store. It does make cutting a little bit easier. And there's still crumbs everywhere. Let's take a look at this bread. So good. It's got a crunchy outer shell, stretchy and gooey in the middle. Is my favorite. I actually started making sourdough in 2020 because there was no yeast in the stores, none at all, and the flour was gone, but I had some flour. Oh, and I got a hookup with flour from one of my clay buddies. And then a lady friend of mine from states away, she sent me a dried yeast starter from her batch. So I was able to start up a sourdough starter from that. It was amazing. So during that time, I actually learned how to take care of a starter. My first few loaves were pretty bad. I would say my first 3 loaves were terrible. They weren't inedible. They just were not like this. They did not look anything like this. They just looked really flat and they were dense. And I chopped them up and made them into croutons. By the 4th loaf, I got pretty good. So this is really trial and error. It takes time to develop the skill, even if you follow a recipe. So I was scouring YouTube and looking around and trying to figure out what works for me. I tried a recipe by Brian Lagerstrom and it didn't work. But I combined what I learned from him with the bread code, and that's how I got the formulas that I got today. Was just a combination of those 2 guys and just trial and error. And then there's another guy, Maurizio, on Instagram that I followed, and I got his technique for folding it to give it a nice, really tight structure so that it looked the way I was hoping it would look. And that took some time too to figure out what to use and how to do it. I even tried out these 2 different shaped bandetons just to try to figure out which one I liked the best. This one produced more of a flat loaf for me, so I ended up using this one. You can also find this down below in my Amazon store. This is the oval bandeton that I used to make this loaf, and it makes the best loaf so far. So definitely oval over round for me. Just depends on what you're making and the shape. Now, if you don't want to start a sourdough starter from scratch, there's also a really good company who I love and I've bought many things from already, Cultures for Health, and they will ship you a sourdough starter that you can start right up, and it is foolproof, and they will offer help along the way if you don't know what you're doing or you need help trying to troubleshoot. So making sourdough bread has never been easier. It's just 3 ingredients: flour, water, and salt. And you could say a 4th ingredient is a sourdough starter, but that is just flour and water and the yeast that cultivates because of you letting it sit out. The only thing you need to worry about is just being patient with yourself and know that it takes time to learn a new skill. And it's gonna be kind of bad in the process, but hey, you get to eat bread, homemade bread. And the first few loaves are not bad. They're still good. It still tastes good. It may just not be the texture that you're wanting. So if they bomb completely, chop them up into little squares, toss it with some olive oil and salt and maybe some Italian seasoning, pop it in the oven and let it dry out on low heat. And you have croutons. And they're so delicious. My son would not stop eating them.
Quick tip.
So here's what I like to do after I slice up all of my sourdough if I'm not going to eat it within a day or two. Get out a plastic bag and I just start layering them in. Usually the whole loaf will fit into one, and if they don't, just go ahead and eat whatever's left over. Then I stick this into the freezer, and whenever I want a piece of bread, I open it up and pull a piece out and put it in the toaster, and it's like fresh bread all over again. So, handy tip.
That was a quick tip.
Comment down below if you've made sourdough bread and let me know your technique and anything that you do differently. I would love to hear it. You can share any pictures or stories with me on Instagram at lunch.withlisa. Follow me there. Let's keep in touch. And if you like what you see and you want to help support me, there's 3 ways you can do it. You can go shopping at my Amazon store or any of the links down below to Amazon. Just click the link and buy anything on Amazon in the next 24 hours and I'll receive a small commission. Or you can become a patron, patreon.com/lunchwithlisa. And you can watch my videos a week ahead of time, like all these lovely people. Or you can buy me a coffee at coffee.com/lunchwithlisa. And it's always free to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in my next video. It's Lunch with Lisa. Stray is a cum catcher. It's not a cum catcher. Oh, Jesus. Oh, okay. That's a good one for the bloopers. La la.